Hello and welcome to another Soil Shepherd's Regenerative Landscaping video. In this video, I compare traditional landscaping practices with regenerative landscaping practices. I focus on 5 categories: weed management, plants, soil health, mulch, and seasonal cleanup. To note, I included chapters so you can jump around as needed. And with that, I'll get started with weeds. First, to understand the differences between traditional and regenerative weed management, I need to explain the role weeds play in nature. Both weeds and all other plants make everything around them better, period. They remove carbon from the air, fix nitrogen in the soil, break up hardpan, stop erosion, and so on. The key for plants to fix these problems is for seeds to be in position, ready to play their role at a moment's notice. For example, if the soil becomes compacted and needs to be broken up, then dandelion seeds are already in the soil and will germinate for their deep taproot to break up the hardpan. Therefore, there are thousands of weed seeds in 1 square foot of land, and there are more on the way. Seeds spread by wind, water, animals, and human activity. So, there are 2 weed management strategies. You can either prevent weed seeds from germinating or kill them after they start growing. Pre-germination strategies involve covering the ground, reducing the number of weed seeds on your property, or changing the conditions that cause weed seeds to germinate. After weeds germinate, options are to dig them out, spray them with chemicals, or use fire to kill the plant. Okay, that covers the basics. Next, let's compare traditional and regenerative landscaping practices. Traditional tactics focus on the symptoms, not the root cause. Weed fabrics, like the picture above, and mulches are used to cover the ground along with the use of pre-emergence to prevent weeds from germinating. Once growing, chemicals are typically used as a last line of defense. Regenerative practices, on the other hand, address the root cause by focusing on the needs of the soil. Improvements do not happen overnight, so mulches are used to cover weed seeds so they do not germinate. Over time, the goal is to transition to living ground covers like the green and gold pictured above. Weeds that do germinate are removed by hand with the assistance of a soil knife. The last and most important tactic is to understand the conditions that cause the weed to germinate and to ensure changes are underway to improve those conditions. Lastly, let's look at the pros and cons of each approach. The traditional model is quick and easy, but has serious drawbacks. The weed fabric does not prevent weed seeds from being deposited on top of the weed fabric. It also doesn't stop weeds from spreading from surrounding areas where weed fabric is not in use. Lastly, and most importantly, chemicals harm all living organisms they contact. Regenerative landscaping has higher upfront costs, considering more plants are used, and the installation of soil amendments like compost. However, over time, the costs of regenerative landscape are lower and less maintenance is required over time by addressing the root cause. Next, let's continue the plant conversation, but focus on plants typically used in home landscapes. I'll use the same approach I took with weeds by highlighting the role plants play in nature. I'm using different points, but everything here also applies to the weeds section. All plants literally make everything around them better. They provide shelter and food for wildlife, reduce the ground temperature, which is important for the organisms living in the soil, prevent the sun from reaching the ground and causing weed seeds to germinate, prevent soil erosion, and plants are the starting point in the food chain. It's amazing that so much time, energy, and resources are spent destroying these wonderful beings. Okay, moving on, I'll talk about goals. Traditional landscapes prioritize plant appearances over plant function. The goal is to complement the home with sterile, low-maintenance solutions that have the same look year-round. On the other hand, regenerative landscapes use native plants to identify and fix problems. Plants are selected based on their problem-solving abilities, which are then arranged to provide the highest aesthetic value with blooms throughout the season, which will support wildlife. So, we understand the importance of plants, and we have our goals. Next, let's look at the tactics used to implement. Traditional landscapes rely on non-native evergreens that are typically non-seeding and non-fruiting so they don't make a mess. Regenerative landscapes take advantage of native annuals, perennials, shrubs, and trees that are planted close together to crowd out weeds. The last two sections compare the pros and cons of the two approaches. For traditional landscapes, the repeated use of non-native shrubs that are similar in size with an abundant inventory make landscape designs easy to complete with predictable outcomes. Unfortunately, these landscapes support minimal wildlife due to the lack of hiding places and food sources. On the other hand, the regenerative landscaping approach builds on the benefits of plants. Key points include providing a food source, shelter, and places for wildlife to raise their young. The downside is these landscapes take several years to completely cover the ground. Next up is my favorite topic, soil health, which ranks number one when talking about regenerative practices. Let's look at all the critical functions soil plays in nature. The most obvious use of soil is its use for growing plants, which we already covered. Soil also plays a vitally important role absorbing, holding, and filtering water. Not just any water, but our drinking water. Other benefits include supporting insects and animals that live in the soil, to which I'm referring to the 1 billion living organisms that are in 1 tablespoon of living soil. These organisms help to store carbon in the ground. Lastly, and possibly most important to homeowners, is weed seed viability is reduced in soils with high organic matter, so over time you have less weeds. Unfortunately, with traditional landscaping, the health of the soil is often overlooked. It's the equivalent to the foundation and the studs holding up a house. Considering both are typically covered with paint, you don't appreciate the important role they play until they are gone. In regenerative landscaping, where soil health is a top priority, you don't assume. Soil tests are used to assess soil health, and amendments are only added based on soil test results. Feeding the soil is done with top dressings of organic matter and the use of plants to feed the soil. Traditional practices often apply fertilizers as an insurance policy based on an underlying assumption that no harm can come from applying extra fertilizer. Another assumption is that mulch will feed the soil, but when black dyed mulches are used, this is not a safe assumption. Mulch results vary depending on the type of dye that is used and the type of wood in the mulch, which is typically not disclosed. Tactics for regenerative landscaping include the use of soil tests, which are typically completed by university extensions, and the application of high-quality composts or leaf molds. Let's finalize soil health by looking at the pros and cons. Traditional practices benefit from the availability of big box store pellets and sprays, which are easy to use, and plants typically respond immediately. Unfortunately, these changes are not truly improving the soil, considering they are not increasing the soil organic matter. As a result, unhealthy soil leads to unhealthy plants, and over-fertilizing leads to runoff, which causes soil imbalances, leading to more weeds. Regenerative practices provide all the benefits highlighted in the role soil plays in nature. Key points include the reduction of weed seeds, healthier plants, holding more water, and storing more carbon. The downside is the availability of premium composts, which take more time and energy to install, along with the increased time nature needs to process the amendments. Next is mulch, which is a short chapter, but not because mulch is unimportant. In nature, mulch plays many important roles by retaining moisture, preventing the sun from reaching weed seeds, preventing soil erosion, adding organic matter to the soil, and insulating the ground so it's cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter, which is important to keep organisms in the soil working longer. The goal for traditional landscapes are typically to complement the home and to prevent weeds, while regenerative landscaping's goals are to capitalize on all those benefits listed in the nature section. For strategies, there are a variety of mulches available, but the common mulch used in my area is either a black dyed wood mulch or a non-dyed wood mulch. Therefore, as I go through the pros and cons, I'm assuming that black dyed mulch was used for traditional, and a triple non-shredded, non-dyed bark mulch was used for regenerative. Therefore, the traditional landscape benefits from readily available material which will cover the ground to prevent weed seeds from germinating. Downsides include unknown wood source, due to the dye, the use of carbon black dye, which is not known to benefit the living organisms in the soil, and the black dye attracts the sun, which increases the temperature in the summer, which is not the goal. On the other hand, the triple shredded mulch will break down quicker, leading to an increase in soil organic matter and also prevent weed seeds from germinating. Downsides include a different look compared to the dyed mulch and availability of a quality wood mulch. The last comparison is seasonal cleanup. First, let's look at the role that landscape debris plays in nature. First is nutrient cycling, the process where plants pull up nutrients from deep in the soil, which are returned to the top layer of the soil as the plant breaks down. This is how nature makes topsoil. Other benefits include insects overwintering in leaf litter, carbon being returned to the soil, shelter for wildlife including these snakes in the above picture, which are found under leaf litter, and lastly, plants are protected from cold winter weather. Next, let's review homeowner goals. In traditional landscaping, the goal is for a clean, neat, and tidy yard, whereas regenerative focuses on a balance between a wild yard and a manicured yard. The goal is to mimic nature with minimal cleanup for safety. These are often referred to as cues of caring. I'll share some regenerative tactics like cutting tree branches for the health of the plant, cut seed heads to prevent certain plants from spreading, clean walking paths, and the use of a separate area to compost excess leaves or debris. On the other side is traditional landscaping, which uses a spring and fall cleanup to remove all debris. Next, we'll move to pros and cons. The primary benefit for traditional landscaping is aesthetics. Homeowners who like the look of mulch and want to ensure leaves are not blowing to a neighbor's property. This has multiple disadvantages, including less carbon stored, less wildlife, unhealthier soil, more weeds due to the sun reaching the soil, and a higher cost of time and labor to complete cleanup practices that are not needed. Regenerative landscaping benefits are a mirror opposite of the cons, with a downside of perceived neglect. Okay, that was a ton of information. I did my best to condense many concepts to keep this to a manageable length. Hopefully the visuals made it easy to follow along. Please leave a comment if anything was not clear or you have any thoughts on these practices. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your support, and as always, please click subscribe so you are notified of our next video, and happy gardening.